Our last speaker tonight is Justin Trottier. I'm really happy that Justin is able to find his way here. He is the founder and spokesperson of the Centre for Inquiry in Canada. He is a board member of the Canadian Secular Alliance and a regular speaker on church-state separation, skeptical inquiry, and fundamental freedoms like freedom of speech. He hosts the CFI's Think Again TV show and appears regularly on the John Oakley Show's Culture War on AM 640 Toronto Radio and the Conspiracy Show on Vision TV, while publishing on the National Post's religion blog. With a passion for science education, Justin also hosts the Star Spot, a space sciences themed podcast, and is a science volunteer with Pathways to Education. Welcome, Justin.
I'm really glad to be here, and thanks to Dagmar for the invitation, and to the rest of you for joining us tonight and helping to organize this important conference. I'm going to complement the remarks that my co-speakers shared by talking a little bit from my own experience with freedom of speech issues, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, both working with the Canadian Secular Alliance, which Dagmar is a member of, and I think see a few other members here as well, and the Centre for Inquiry, which many of you probably know of. It's a national educational nonprofit headquartered in nearby Toronto. It's long been recognized by enlightened philosophers and thinking citizens of Western liberal democracies that society is best served by ensuring maximum freedom consistent with good order. Now, that may be self-evident, but it was a long and difficult journey to get those principles enshrined in our laws. And I think of all the fundamental freedoms that we enjoy in our society, freedom of conscience and expression is the keystone. Many other so-called fundamental freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, are really derivatives of this fundamental freedom. I'm going to get back to that point about the relationship between different fundamental freedoms toward the end of my talk. I'm going to comment a little bit on recent developments and the Office of Religious Freedom in particular. Freedom of conscience and speech should be seen as a basic human right, but not everybody in Canada agrees with that assessment. In fact, during testimony into the case against anti-Semite writer Mark Lemire, Dean Stacey, the former senior chief investigator for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, was asked what value he placed on freedom of speech when he investigates these cases. And this supposed defender of basic rights and freedoms responded, "Freedom of speech is an American concept, so I don't give it any value." The Human Rights Commissions in Canada are vital apparatuses for confronting genuine discrimination in our society. But expressions of controversial speech are themselves vital mechanisms for rectifying discrimination. And it's been frustrating to see some of these agencies not only neglecting to protect this fundamental freedom, but actually becoming arms of censorship of the state. We know some of the famous cases. Ezra Levant, editor of the Western Standard, investigated by a number of human rights commissions for publishing the Danish Mohammed cartoons out of Alberta in 2006. A number of human rights commissions hearing complaints against Maclean's magazine for supposedly subjecting Canadian Muslims to hatred and contempt for publishing 18 supposed Islamophobic articles over the preceding 2 years prior to the investigation. The defendants in these cases were ultimately acquitted, but only after months of investigation and thousands of dollars in defense. But now, finally, Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, the legislation that empowers the Federal Commission to investigate, quote, the communication of hate messages by telephone or the internet, has been repealed. Last year, the federal government passed a private member's bill to remove Section 13 from that legislation. And I think that other provinces appear to be moving in that direction as well. A recent development that adds a bit of an addendum to this story regarding the Human Rights Commissions relates to a new project that the Centre for Inquiry is about to embark upon. We've just learned that our billboard advertisements, which we were planning to put up in British Columbia, these ads would use the style of Christian parables but change the religious language to humanist lessons. These ads were proposed to be put up in Vancouver and other markets to Pattison, an advertising agency. And Pattison rejected the ads. We just learned this last week. We haven't even gone public with this, so you'll have to keep this quiet. Pattison's reason was that they didn't want that message to be associated with the Pattison brand. Now, we're considering our legal options, of course, but one idea that we have had was to launch a human rights complaint with the BC Human Rights Tribunal on the grounds that Pattison has effectively, by running religious ads, but not our ads, discriminated against atheists. If this is accepted, it would be a rather unique case. Although investigating discrimination based on creed, it would also be unique in using the Human Rights Commission not to argue for censorship of religiously offensive speech, as the previous examples that I mentioned were examples of, but it would be going to the Human Rights Commission to argue against censorship, to argue for freedom of speech as a basic human right. And I don't think there's a lot of cases of human rights commissions investigating for defending free speech. This might be the first. It's precisely that message that the right to speak freely is a fundamental freedom, not the right to be free of offense, that motivated the Center for Inquiry, that same organization, to launch a project called International Blasphemy Rights Day in 2009, which aims to take a courageous stand for an individual's freedom to choose to be blasphemous, not to just be blasphemous for its own sake, but to have that freedom. In many countries, that freedom, of course, doesn't exist. International Blasphemy Rights Day is every September 30th, so this conference was well timed, although I'm not sure if that was done on purpose or not, but it's a nice coincidence. Every International Blasphemy Rights Day has been very eventful. There was that first one in 2009 at University of Toronto that I was at that prompted a massive debate in front of the main academic building on campus. And I still recall one student furiously throwing our copy of the Satanic Verses in the garbage for apparently promoting Satanism. And most recently, it doesn't promote Satanism. That was the joke. Most recently, in the last year, 2012, Saskatoon members of CFI and the University of Saskatchewan Free Thought Alliance were bullied, intimidated, and received death threats while promoting campus-approved International Blasphemy Rights Day activities. So censorship's alive and well here in Canada. The University of Saskatchewan Free Thought Alliance had posted displays involving pictures of deities of several religions, including, yes, some Mohammed cartoons and images of Jesus. And in response, the president of the student group was warned by two students that, quote, blood will be drawn and you will not get away with this alive. While most students of all faiths, including Islamic students, engaged in calm, rational, and appropriate forms of debate, there was unfortunately a small number of Muslim students who reacted by tearing down and vandalizing displays and stealing the phones of two individuals who had been taking pictures of the vandals. The phones were later returned, the photos had been deleted. While defending free speech, especially for controversial forms of expression, we do expect, of course, passionate exchange and disagreement. We don't expect, and we will never tolerate, responses that amount to criminal behavior. Now, just to be clear, though I've been focusing so far on censorship of opinions, largely critiques of religion, which I happen to personally agree with, the test of whether you support free speech is whether you're willing to make the same pronouncements in defense of commentary with which you disagree, especially those with which you disagree passionately. After all, even the most oppressive despot is quite willing to support free speech rights to hear what he wants to hear. This is the part of my speech where I try to challenge my secular atheist colleagues to be fair and consistent. For example, at the University of Ottawa in March 2010, notorious conservative loudmouth Ann Coulter's scheduled speech was cancelled after protesters swarmed the auditorium and police advised the organizers of their safety concerns. In response, many on the left, including the secular left, applauded the protesters and laughed at Ann Coulter, accusing her of canceling the event because she was unprepared to handle the negative reaction. Now, as somebody who debates conservative religious types regularly, Ann Coulter is to me an individual with absolutely despicable ideas. They seem to be getting more and more despicable every time I hear her. But she should have a right to communicate those despicable ideas without fear for her safety. If a bunch of atheists wanted to stage a talk by Richard Dawkins or some other of our atheist celebrities, A protest that involved threats, intimidation, and blocking the entrance so people were unable to attend would result in our rightly feeling that our free speech rights had been violated, that our members had been denied their right to participate in the free exchange of ideas, to decide for themselves whether atheists were saying something profound or profoundly mistaken. If we don't show the same strong defense of free speech for our opponents, then we can't claim to truly support free speech. As an organization, we try to put our money where our mouth is. Campus groups affiliated with our organization have argued the pro-choice position in debates on abortion. But we've also fought for the rights of those with other positions on abortion to be allowed to speak freely without having their clubs banned on campus. Last year, we even defended William Swinimer, a grade 12 Nova Scotia student who was suspended for wearing a pro-Jesus t-shirt. We argued, quite simply, that the shirt causes no harm and is a perfectly acceptable contribution to the marketplace of ideas. This wasn't just smart strategy. It also gave us a great opportunity to explain where we draw the line on these issues. For example, we support a student's right to access the Bible in their school library, along with the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, or the God Delusion. But we oppose providing privileged access to students by religious leaders like the Gideons to pass out proselytizing material. We support the teaching of the facts of religion in public school world religion classes, but we fight tooth and nail to defund religious schools that indoctrinate students at taxpayer expense. We believe religious ideas should be debated in the public square, but demand that if that debate should be meaningful, the infrastructure of that public square must be set neutral and not biased at the outset by, for example, saying the Lord's Prayer at city council meetings, which I understand was an issue around these parts, yes? Yeah, it was, thanks to one of your local champions here. So why this strong, uncompromising free speech? Censorship is strategically misguided. It often serves to increase the controversy and the profile surrounding the literature or the event being censored. Censorship of offensive speech also has the tendency to offend those censored, potentially leading to more angry and aggressive attempts to have the same views aired. It risks making martyrs and heroes of those with warped ideas. It results in bottling up views that need to be aired, and risks forcing them underground where they cannot be monitored or dealt with more reasoned speech. And this is the key thing, censorship rarely changes anybody's mind on these controversial questions. In conclusion, I want to stress that while censorship in the form of legal consequences for expressing views should be extremely rare, a conversation on the appropriate and effective tone for debating conscientious topics is needed, especially in what appears to be an increasingly polarized political landscape. I think that is one role for groups like ours, where we can come together with those from very different points of view. We all have a common stake in fostering deeper, more productive debate and open exchanges, even on sacred issues. And to let you in on a little secret, I don't think this is just a good principle. I think it does have strategic benefits. As the Center for Inquiry became known for being a champion, even for free speech rights of religious conservatives, we started to benefit from reciprocal support. For example, the Canadian Atheist Bus campaign that we led. As you may know, we ran that now infamous line on some Canadian transit buses, "There probably is no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life." Now, the United Church of Canada, for example, far from condemning these bus advertisements, they actually ran their own response ad. Bus Stop Bible Studies, a group that places religious messages on public transit, spoke publicly in our defense. Even Imam Sayyad Sahawardi, who had brought that first complaint against Ezra Levant that I mentioned at the top of my remarks, he didn't come out to censor our message. He launched a pro-God campaign under the slogan, quote, "God cares for everyone, even those who say he doesn't exist." Now, these are funny, sometimes frustrating, but they all, I believe, in the end, advance a healthy dialogue in that public square. Consistency on the free speech file can certainly help us, and I can't see how it can hurt us if we believe that in the long run, the marketplace of ideas and genuine freedom of expression does result in the best ideas succeeding. I want to comment briefly on the Office of Religious Freedom. I support this office because I support freedom of religion as a fundamental freedom. The issue to me, though, is that freedom of religion is not the only fundamental freedom. And I don't even think it's the fundamental freedom. I think freedom of religion is a form of freedom of expression. I would like to see this office expand its mandate to deal with all these fundamental freedoms because they often interact with each other, especially in the case of blasphemy, as I was describing. Blasphemy is interesting because religious groups will often claim that their freedom of religion requires them to deny freedom of speech to the blasphemer. And I think that here atheists and religious minorities should work together. In most parts of the world where blasphemy is persecuted, it's often by radicals, sometimes radical Muslim leaders, that have both atheists and others, often Christians, equally in their crosshairs. Let me give you a good example that we've been making some noise over. Alexander On, an Indonesian 30-year-old atheist, now in jail for 2.5 years. His crime, he posted the words, "God doesn't exist," on Facebook. That was it. But when you look at some of the actions taken by the people who persecuted On, and ultimately had him charged with blasphemy, you see something interesting. These are the same groups that engage in violent riots calling for Christians to leave Indonesia and for any women not wearing a hijab to be hunted down. There are many examples, both domestic and international, where a strong, united, and consistent fight for free speech and against censorship and blasphemy would benefit everyone. Atheists, Christians, members of minority religions of all sorts, and let's not forget also those within mainstream faith of a given region that have controversial or unorthodox religious beliefs or opinions. I did very quickly want to add a quick remark about recent events related to the Quebec Charter of Values and the debate on public prayer, which has suddenly flared up as a bit of a national issue. That one being fueled by developments all across Canada. We have the Saguenay case in Quebec that's been appealed first to the Quebec Appeals Court, where the court found that the mayor of Saguenay did not engage in discriminatory acts by including a religious prayer. That's now being appealed, or leave to appeal is being considered at the Supreme Court of Canada. We have in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, the case of Ashu Solo, who brought a human rights complaint against the city of Saskatoon for prayers there. And in that case, the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission's agreed that there is evidence to look further, to investigate further, to see if his rights have been violated. And now the city of Saskatoon is looking at alternatives to the prayer. And of course, in Ontario, we mentioned earlier, right here in Dagmar's fight, very successful, very positive diplomatic way that she did to succeed in removing, was it the Lord's Prayer here, or the non-denominational prayer? There's so many different cases, I always confuse them. But we have other cases outside, across Ontario, in Peterborough, and Peter Ferguson's case, a number of others that are pending. All of a sudden it appears to be a national issue, so we've been asked to comment on why we think suddenly there's interest in the prayer issue and what that means for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Very good, I'll be done very quickly. I just want to comment that in both the case of the Quebec Charter and the city prayer issues, I think a neutral, secular public space is required precisely so that individuals can enjoy genuine freedom of religion and conscience. That's my big lesson there. Individuals may choose to pray or not to pray, but the infrastructure of the public square, in that case government proceedings, must be secular so as to allow genuine freedom of conscience. In my opinion, the Quebec Charter misses this point by targeting people rather than institutions. The focus there is on the religiosity of employees, people. But public support for religion is ignored, whether in the form of symbolic favoritism, such as the crucifix staying up on the National Assembly walls, or substantive support to religion, such as public subsidies to faith schools in Quebec. By failing to address the establishment and institutionalization of religion in Quebec, while focusing instead on a person's choice of what they wear, the Charter, in my opinion, takes the wrong aim and, as we're seeing, appears to be sparking a bit of an anti-secularism backlash that will hurt us in the long run. So to me, this is a question about religious toleration versus religious dominance. In the case of the prayers, individuals should be allowed to pray, that's toleration, but government proceedings shouldn't favor religion, that's dominance. In the case of Quebec, individuals should be allowed to wear what they want, that's toleration, but the institutions, the establishment, should be neutral. When it's not, that's domination. That's why I'm a little disappointed that the Charter, which was motivated, I think, by a sense that religious accommodations had gone too far and we did need to do something about the public square, is in fact leaving the public square alone and not targeting vestiges of religiosity that do bias that square away from neutrality, which otherwise would give everybody freedom of religion, freedom of conscience in a meaningful way. I'm going to stop there, and I don't know if we're taking questions or what the next step is, but thank you for being such an attentive audience. Appreciate being here.